Our lecture in Chapter 16 this week is in two different parts because it's there's a number of slides associated with this particular topic, and it's suitable given that the topic is substance abuse. One of the things that I think is a truism you'll find in the field of social work is that no matter what you do in the field, you're going to encounter clients that are abusing substances of one nature or another, whether it be alcohol, marijuana, or other drugs, prescribed or otherwise. And some of your clients will not be able to manage their use of those substances such that it will become a major problem in their lives, and it may in fact be the reason that they're referred to you, or if not the reason, certainly one of the underlying reasons for their interactions with you. I think I may have said before during the unit on child protection some weeks back, but I'll say it again, that in the Kenai office, at least over the last many years, the vast majority of the cases in which young children in particular needed to be removed from their families for their own protection almost always involved substance abusing parents, and the substance abuse was often the reason for the removal. One of the things that I've come to learn over the years is that persons who are addicted to substances will oftentimes, maybe usually, do almost anything to maintain their addiction. And I've seen individuals make decisions in, at least as most of us would judge at least, to be very, very poor decisions in order to continue to maintain their substance use. People have lost their children permanently because of the strength of the addiction. And so when we talk about substance abuse problems in this chapter, in the context of social work, keep in mind that this is an area that will require your attention no matter what particular field of social work you're working in. One of the reasons for this is that substance abuse, of course, is very prevalent across the United States, and one of the largest substances, one of the most frequently abused substances that you're ever going to run across in your work is alcohol. You'll notice here that the slide says that more than half of Americans aged 12 years or older are reported to be current drinkers of alcohol. Now that was a survey back in 2004, but I'm sure it's still pretty relevant today. And this is it's significant in that it goes back to 12 years of age, and this does suggest that alcohol use is beginning to be a problem really much earlier in age than some of us may believe. Of those who report to be drinking, about a quarter of them participated in binge drinking at least once in the 30 days prior to that particular survey. Binge drinking has a definition, and I don't have it at my fingertips, but it's the use of might be 6 or more drinks, something like that, in a short period of time. 7% were reported to be heavy drinkers. Among youth, about 16% of youth acknowledge the use of alcohol, and with young adults, the rate of binge drinking was even higher than in general, up to 41%, and the rate of heavy drinking more than twice what it was for adults in general. 7% of the population aged 12 or older in 2008. That equates to over 17 million people, and this is a pretty significant problem then, as you can see. And about 2/3 of the male report current drinking, and about over half of females age 18 to 25, that's young adults, report drinking alcohol. And so and one other mention here in this slide is about driving under the influence of alcohol. As 33.5 million persons, that's about 14% of the persons surveyed aged 12 or older in 2002, reported driving under the influence of alcohol at least once in the year before the interview. In 2008, here that says over 20 million Americans aged 12 and older were current illicit drug users, and illicit drugs, of course, would be drugs that haven't been prescribed for that particular person to use. And not surprisingly, among those drugs, the most commonly used one is marijuana. And you can see there's a high use in terms of past month in this particular slide. Almost 10% of youth aged 12 to 17, these are teenagers, young teenagers, were current illicit drug users, 7% using marijuana, and others getting into their parents' prescription drugs, inhalants, and so on. There was a very good commercial in the last year or so about individuals, about kind of warning parents about where they keep their medication, and showing teenagers taking their pills at the in the bathroom and things like that, and this is something that's perhaps a bigger problem than parents realize. And so this is one thing that particularly when you have substance abusing adolescents, you want to encourage parents to do, which is to make sure they secure their prescription medications. And of course, among many adults, just the use of prescription medication, even prescribed by the doctor, is problematic. And here I'm talking about licit drug use, and I don't know if there is such a word, but I'm not talking about illicit drug use. I'm talking about the use of prescribed medications. And you may know that in any community, and the Kenai-Soldotna area is certainly no exception to this, there are a few physicians that are notorious for being pretty generous with their prescriptions as far as with prescribed drugs and things like that, for a number of different reasons. And that's a concern for a lot of the professionals in the communities. This is true for mostly every community. Here's the DSM-4, again moving into the DSM-5 now, but this is the DSM-4 description of dysfunctional use of substances. In other words, somebody may smoke a little pot, somebody may drink occasionally, socially, whatever, and that's not necessarily saying that's not a problem in and of itself, but it's certainly not what we would describe as substance abuse necessarily. And so here is how we define substance abuse, and this is the frequent use of substances, and that this interferes with functioning in a number of different areas of one's life, or in at least one or two areas of one's life. That it impairs functioning in dangerous situations such as driving or the use of machines. This is something that's interesting, because among the, I'm going to digress here a little bit, go down a little rabbit trail, but among the youth, the kids that I have taken care of over the years, not only my own sons, but also the exchange students that I've hosted, a few of them have tended to hang with kids who I think were pretty clear to be involved with marijuana. And I can remember one time in a discussion with one of the teenagers where he was saying that he was okay riding with this boy who had smoked marijuana 2 or 3 hours earlier because he wasn't high anymore by the time he got behind the wheel. Well, in fact, while somebody may not actually feel high and maybe not showing the symptoms of being high with marijuana smoking, THC stays in your system for up to 15 days. It titrates out, basically, if you know your chemistry terms, little by little it washes out of your system over the course of a couple of weeks. If a person who's smoked pot continues to smoke pot during that time, then the amount of THC essentially builds up in the system. And while that person may not be actively high when they're getting behind the wheel of a car any longer because they smoked last night and it's 8 o'clock in the morning, there's still a significant amount of THC in their system, and that is going to impact their things like peripheral vision and their depth perception, and their reaction times will be slowed, and all of those kinds of things. All these kinds of things that are the function of smoking pot and are more pronounced when a person is high continue to exist after that person is no longer high until the THC is out of their system. And again, with a chronic smoker, you're going to see that to be a bigger problem. And so when we talk about the use of substances impairing functioning, this is why maybe somebody who's a chronic smoker of marijuana has a substance abuse issue that might not be present, say for instance, for somebody who smoked it once every couple of months or something like that. Substances leading to arrest, seriously interfering with relationships, with their ability to participate in child rearing. As I mentioned to you a few slides back, this is often the reason for removal of children, and it isn't because we make a moral judgment about marijuana smoking in the child protection field, but it's because for those chronic smokers in particular, when we get urinalysis done or whatever, and we find extremely high levels of THC in their system, that tells us that their ability to respond to the kinds of crises that little children, toddlers in particular, might present, turning on the stove or getting near a flame or whatever it might be, that the reaction time is significantly slowed, and so they're not really going to be able to respond in a protective fashion as a parent should. So, here's one little test about substance abuse. It says 2 simple questions asked to users that have an 80% chance of diagnosing substance abuse. I'm not sure where that figure comes from, but this is an interesting concept. But the questions: in the past year, have you ever drunk or used drugs more than you mean to? And secondly, have you ever felt you wanted or needed to cut down on your drinking or drug use in the last year? So if you're answering yes to these questions, essentially Miller believes that there's an 80% chance that you have a substance abuse problem. Here are 4 questions to predict alcohol abuse from another study, or rather a questionnaire called Cut, Annoyed, Guilty, and Eye Opener questionnaire, CAGE questionnaire. Have you ever felt you should cut down on your drinking? Have people annoyed you by criticizing your drinking? In other words, are you defensive about it? Have you ever felt guilty about your drinking? And have you ever had, and that is, in other words, are your mom and dad inside of you telling you you're drinking too much? Have you ever had a drink first thing in the morning to steady your nerves or to get rid of a hangover? So those are 4 questions also that point towards alcohol abuse. Now, this would not be enough to get you admitted to an alcohol treatment program. Don't get me wrong, but this is a good indicator. A way perhaps to kind of screen individuals for alcohol use or alcohol abuse. Certain populations of individuals also have substance abuse services withheld from them, and in particular, older adults sometimes don't get treatment for substance abuse problems. Sometimes it's misdiagnosed, or the alcohol use is attributed to depression or things like that, and physicians and professionals will often kind of leave things be with older people, kind of thinking that maybe they shouldn't be asking them to give up well-established habits or whatever. Again, I think there's a certain amount of our societal lack of value with older persons to think, people say to themselves, well, this is an older person, and we're not going to bother him or bother with him or her even, because this is just what he does, and it's not going to really matter that much. I mean, there is some of that attitude, I think, about treatment of older individuals in many particular areas, and the substance abuse field is not any exception to that. Women seek help for alcoholism more frequently from primary care physicians than men do, and we have come to find that alcoholism develops and progresses in women very differently than it does in men, because women metabolize alcohol differently than men, according to at least the studies that Galic refers to in the text. As a result of that, then they don't realize that they have a problem with alcohol until later than men usually do, and in the end they wind up with a higher death rate from alcoholism that is anywhere from 50 to 100% higher than men. Interestingly, liver damage occurs more quickly in women than in men as well, even with a lower intake level of alcohol, and that has to do with the difference in metabolism rates there. Women with alcohol problems also have higher rates of dual diagnoses. That is, that there are diagnoses of mental health problems associated with alcoholism, like depression, and also childhood sexual abuse, phobia and panic disorders, all these other kinds of things that are here. Why is this? Again, let's think a little bit about cultural things, and I'm not to turn attention away from women, but to look at men and look at gender role socialization of females and males. Men and hard drinking and aggressive behaviors and risk taking, that's all a part of being a man in the traditional masculine socialization. And so it's also very possible that men who have alcohol problems should also be diagnosed with mental health issues as well, but we don't look at them because we think, well, they're guys and that's just the way they drink. So there's subtle kinds of things in these studies and everything that really are cause for us to stop and contemplate why these things are. Certainly, with the difference in the metabolizing of alcohol with women and men, that's certainly there's a biological reason there. But I'm also saying that I think there are a lot of social reasons for this as well. And there are many factors as far as adolescence and developing alcohol problems related to, home life in particular. And certainly when there's personal behavioral problems and there's the kids are rejected or disciplined a lot or whatever, you're going to find more issues with that. But also children raised in homes with parents who drink, particularly with parents who drink more heavily or more frequently or at times in inappropriate situations. Those teens are more or less socialized. Those kids are socialized into the use of alcohol. And this is something that I discovered and was told when I came here with a teenager when I came up from Florida way back in the 1980s. And I quickly found this out that, in Alaska with the long winters and things, we have a higher rate of alcohol use and abuse in this state, or we have had traditionally, and I think we still do, than in other places. And children learn from their parents that one way to cope with loneliness or to cope with isolation or to cope with stress or to relax is to drink alcohol. And so kids see their parents doing this as they grow up. They see parties and things like that. And so then as they grow into this, then they begin to emulate those same patterns. Kids, well, they say, children learn what they live, right? I mean, kids don't only pick up on our good habits and the things we want them to learn. They're observing their adults all the time. And so a child that grows up in a home where there's a lot of alcohol use probably are at higher risk to develop alcoholism. Also, there's always been a theory in alcohol that there are biological factors associated with alcoholism, and studies have shown over the years at least that if you have one parent who's an alcoholic as a young person, you have a certain percentage of more likelihood of being an alcoholic yourself. If you have two parents who are alcoholics, that also increases. And usually when you hear those things, they're attributing this to the biological genetic factors that may go into alcoholism. We don't really know necessarily what causes these things, but this is one theory. Another possibility is that these children are just socialized into, when you have no parent showing you how to function on a day-to-day basis without the use of intoxicants, you're going to be more likely to think that that's the way that you don't have any examples of how to cope with stress and sadness and all sorts of emotions we might experience on a daily basis. If kids that are using alcohol and drugs, I mean, if there's use of that in elementary school, then it's likely that they're going to be more likely they're going to be addicted by early adolescence, and so that's an even bigger concern. 40% of young adults aged 18 to 29 who began drinking before the age of 15 were considered to be alcohol dependent. That's really almost half. I think that's supposed to be 1998, by the way. Almost half of the young adults less than 30 years of age who began drinking before 15 were considered to be alcohol dependent at the time they reached 30 years of age. Think about that. That's significant. Early use really has an impact on one's future behavior patterns and those kinds of things. Only 10% who began drinking after the age of 19 had a problem with alcohol at the age of 30. I have heard this from study to study that suggests as a parent, as you're raising teenagers, the longer you go, the further you get them through their adolescence before they begin to use alcohol and substances, the less likely it is they're going to be an addict. And this statistic suggests that very clearly. And so I had one training session I was at a year or so ago. The individual doing the training, Linda Chamberlain, she's a national expert on brain development and the effects of violence and on brain development of children and things like that. She lives in Homer, but as a national expert, and she's right here in our backyard, and she mentioned, she said that every 6 months you get your teenager through without him or her having a significant problem with substances or with alcohol. Consider that a win, because it's closer and closer and closer to the point where the odds of it becoming a major problem later in life are reduced significantly. The last slide in this particular section, it talks about medical problems that result from substance abuse, and it's not surprising that those who engage in alcohol use or drug use heavily are going to have a number of medical problems, and some of them are the more obvious things like head injuries and spinal separations that result from accidents while somebody was actively high or stoned or drunk. But also, heavy drinkers, because their stomach is upset, and a lot of times, I've observed this with older alcoholics, in fact, where they don't want they not only they fail to eat, not because they don't feel like eating, but because their system gets to a point where they really don't want to take food in. I don't know if their metabolism is affected or what it is, but they can't really hold food in their stomach sometimes, and so there's a lot of nutritional deficiencies. And as you see here in this slide, this results in all sorts of problems that look like mental health issues, and make it very difficult for them to function on a daily basis. And this is probably one reason why many alcoholics can't function in a job over a long period of time. Stomach disorders, liver damage, severe heartburn, all these kinds of things might have their origins in heavy drinking because of what alcohol does to the mucosal lining of the stomach. And so there are a number of different things here that I think need to be considered as in understanding substance abuse and alcohol abuse, and why it is that we need to be concerned with this. Adding on my own thinking, a recent trend, and I think probably when I was 20 years of age, I would have been very much in support of the legalization of marijuana, and it's sort of a recent political and social trend in the United States, and here in our own state, the movement is afoot. There's no question about it, and as I've grown older over the years, and I've seen the impact of substances, and I'm thinking less about marijuana itself and more about alcohol. And as a society, we don't know how to deal with alcohol. We're not managing alcohol properly. I mean, we just read a number of slides about the use of alcohol and how it impacts individuals' lives and those kinds of things. And we're going to be talking more about treatment here in the next section, which is often ineffective, clearly ineffective, and so I guess the question I have is if we really don't know, if we're not really managing alcohol all that well, why are we going to add still another intoxicant to those things that we can use and it be legal? I'm not in favor, personally, I'm not in favor of putting pot users and even substance abusers in jail. Maybe distributors and sellers, but certainly not those who use. Shouldn't be in jail. They should be in treatment if they need it. But so I'm not talking about criminalizing it. I think decriminalizing, for instance, marijuana use is appropriate. That's different from legalizing marijuana. Instead of making it legal, we could decriminalize it so that we don't have a criminal penalty for its use. But it just seems like our society, our culture, is taking a step backward when we are endorsing the use of still another intoxicant to get through the day. It's just, to me, it just doesn't make sense. So it's just something for you to think about. We'll see what happens over the long run. Colorado and Washington were the first two states to come forward, and the results are still not in yet on those states as to what's going to happen with this. And so it'll be interesting to watch in the years ahead. Thank you. So take a break and come on back and pick up the second section of this chapter's lectures after you've done so.